Okay, welcome to another Thursday of the Transformational Transparency series. Welcome to those on Instagram, those on Facebook. Don't forget, if you are coming in the room, make sure you let me know that you're here because StreamYard doesn't let me know who's in. And when you get here, don't forget to don't forget to share it out because this series means a whole lot to me. So I hope everyone has a great week, and we are really going to get into this. If you don't know me, I have been on my stories, and there are people that are like watching the stories and whatnot that I have no idea. Like, I've never talked to, I've never messaged. We just follow each other. So I want to say thank you for that. And also, if you don't know me, I am Shamar Latanja. No, I'm just kidding. The J is silent. But I am a Christian life coach. I help people rebuild, transform, reclaim their power, and boldly walk in their purpose. And my services are all faith-based. The reason behind the series, well, you're coming in. I debuted the series last week. The reason behind the transformational transparency series is because when I took my sabbatical, when I went on break, I really got to the point where I had a lot of revelations, and I found out a lot of things about myself. And so I created this series, and the series is all based on things that I went through, things that I've gone through, how I had to just deal with parts of myself that I didn't want to deal with. And you know how I do. I like to bring everybody on here with me. So if I got to deal with it, we all got to deal with it. But no, the series really is for me to be really transparent about this life and about what we go through and about things that we face. And tonight is no exception. Last week, I laid down the hammer. I put out what we were going to do, what we're not going to do, how things are changing because I want a more involved life, really. So tonight, we're really going to go into that whole isolation. Okay, let me get my little ticker because I did not get the little ticker here. I put on here that I would rather walk hot coals than be isolated. And let me just tell you, I mean that to the fullest extent. Because when I started coming up with the series, isolation, incubation, elevation, when I started coming up with that, it was because I would hear people say, oh, God really had to isolate me. Or I would hear a pastor say or a preacher say, as they're praying over people, God is isolating you for a reason. And to me, that really just seemed extreme. Like, I never wanted to be isolated. I don't want to be isolated. I don't know what, this is. I don't know why you would need to isolate me. That's not what we about to do here. I don't want to be isolated. So when I would hear that, my worst fear is that God will pull me back and tell me that I need to isolate for a little while. My worst fear was that God would put me in a period of sabbatical or not being out there. My worst fear was that God would say, I need you to sit down for a little bit. And I would hear these stories, and I used to say, God, please don't ever do that to me. I don't want to be isolated. And the reason why I feel like I was so afraid to go through a period of isolation, which I ended up going through anyway, the reason why I feel like I was afraid to go through it is because there's a lot of self-reflection that happens in isolation. There's a lot of what am I missing out that happens in isolation. There's a lot of I don't want to be alone in isolation. And none of that is what isolation is. Isolation gets such a bad rap. So that's why I didn't want to be isolated. To me, that was the worst thing ever. And I felt like if I was isolated, if I was pulled back, then that meant that I was doing something wrong. And so I didn't want any of that. Not realizing that I had a really bad idea of what isolation meant. And in order for me to get back on track, I had to go ahead and be isolated. If you see me looking off to the side, it is because I am definitely looking at my notes because I want to make sure I'm staying on point with you all. So again, yes, it's extreme, but I would have much rather walk on hot coals, vacuum the beach, mop the ocean, all of that than be isolated. But here's the thing about isolation. We have to really begin to reframe what that is. The isolation, incubation, and elevation, they all go hand in hand. And it starts with isolation. So the first thing that's first, how do we do this? How do we go about this? Why are you afraid of being isolated? First things first, you're not missing anything. A lot of times people don't want to be isolated because they feel like, especially if you're in business, oh, if I'm not out there, then I'm not getting clients or I'm not getting customers, or someone is going to be the top person or someone's going to be this. And that's not always the case. That's not always how it goes down. So you've got to allow yourself to be isolated so you can get to these next levels. I hope y'all can really hear me because I'm getting my little Wi-Fi signal. So there's that. So that's why you're afraid to be isolated, because God forbid you have to face yourself and look at yourself. And what do I do during isolation? What is this period? What happens? Am I just sitting here looking around, looking at you looking at me, and that's all? And it really is not. There's so much more to it than that. So first thing first, let's really get into what isolation really is. Okay. First thing you have to understand is isolation. There is a big difference between loneliness and being alone. And to me, it was always combined. It was always the two are one and the same. You're alone and you're lonely, but that's not even the case. So with isolation, the first thing you have to understand is if you are lonely, that is missing somebody, missing people, wanting somebody to be in your space at all times, wanting somebody to be near you because you're afraid to be alone. And that's why many of us don't want to be isolated. That's why many of us don't want to go through the period of having to pull back, because we're afraid we're going to be lonely. But being alone is, yes, you're by yourself, but you're still full. You're still whole. You're still complete. You're not really desiring someone to be in your space all the time. So you're alone, but you're all right. Like you're doing okay. Like you good. Like, nobody else needs to be in your face all the time. That's the difference. Isolation is not always loneliness. A lot of times it's just being alone so we can get ourselves together. So when you look at the definition of isolation, and I promise you, I wanted to throw my entire shoe. Actually, let me go back. When God told me it was time for me to isolate and go away for 30 days, I was like, excuse me, I have a business, right? I got things to do, right? I got clients to get right. Like I can't take a 30-day break, God, like nothing. Like I can't do that. I can't take a 30-day break. But the reality is, yes, you can. And I was too afraid to do it. But anyways, when I get into isolation, when I looked at the definition, to isolate really means to set apart from among others, especially to separate from another substance so as to obtain pure or in a free state. First and foremost, isolation. Stop thinking about it as, oh my God, I'm totally by myself. So we think about isolation. Think about how we were in quarantine. When everyone was quarantined at the beginning of 2020 and we had to pull back and we had to stay at home orders, that was to keep us safe. So you weren't isolated and being told to stay at home just because you were being punished, but that was to keep us safe. There was some crazy virus out here that we had no idea about. And the only way to keep us safe and to keep us in a pure state was to isolate and was to stay at home. So the whole thing about isolation really is to keep you safe and to keep you pulled back and to keep you in a state where you can stay pure and when you can grow. And when we really start to think about it, every major prophet that we have talked to, that we have gone through, that we have dealt with, every major prophet before any type of elevation was pulled back and isolated. Every major prophet went through a period of isolation before they were elevated. And it was within that period of isolation that they began to change and that they were incubated. So the isolation, I'm moving my notes, the isolation in and of itself, for real, if you don't have a plan to change, if there's no plan to transform, there's no plan to get better, then the isolation can definitely cause depression. That's why a lot of times when we were in quarantine, we were saying, okay, what are you doing while you're in quarantine? What are you doing while you're waiting? What are you doing while you're isolating? What is it that you're doing? If you're simply isolating just to isolate, then depression will set in. Anxiety will set in. The whole, what am I missing? That absolutely will set in. But there is a process that happens within the isolation. I find that you're never pulled back. You're never told to isolate just because. You're never told to isolate because you're being punished. There's a whole process that has to happen. And when we talk about that process, the process that I'm talking about is that whole incubation period. Okay, now, with the whole incubation period, let me just tell you all, I am not a biologist. I am not a doctor. I'm not none of that. So when I first heard the word incubation, and I first heard somebody else say that you're isolated to incubate, I remember thinking, okay, where do I go with this? Because I have no idea on how to explain the whole incubation period. I had no idea on how to explain that. But when I began to look up what incubation is, and I had an idea of it, I thought, okay, you're in this little cubicle thing and you're set aside and you're put there so you can grow. That's all I knew. But really, when you're going through the period of incubation, the whole definition of incubation, you're maintaining something, looking at my notes, You're maintaining something such as an embryo or a chemically active system, and you are a chemically active system under conditions favorable for development. So when you're incubation anything, that whole period is really the time that's needed for any particular process of development or transformation to take place. That incubation period is important for your development and for your transformation. So what does that look like? The first favorable condition that's needed that we don't think is needed is to isolate it. When you incubate something, you have got to put it in something and set it apart. It can't be with everything else, because if it is, it'll get caught up in all the outside influences. It can't be with everything else because you've got to be able to keep it safe, and keep it stable. But the issue with us is this: we don't think that isolation is a favorable condition because of what we think about it. So what do we normally do? We begin to say, okay, God, why me? And, why am I alone? And why am I all by myself? And why did you put me here? And why did you put me there? And nobody loves me. And I'm so lonely. And we just really, we go ham with God because we don't like the period of isolation. To us, that's not favorable. We're not in the mix. We don't know what's going on, and that's not favorable. So we go back and forth with God about being isolated. We go back and forth with God about this condition. We go back and forth with life and ourselves about having to pull back a little bit to recalibrate. And the worst thing that you could possibly do during this time is to jump back out there. Because we don't like being set aside. To us, that's not favorable. So after we've argued with God, after we've argued with ourselves, after we've, gone back and forth with life, we then throw ourselves back out there in the mix way before it's time. And we miss the whole incubation period, that whole period of being set aside, being set apart so you can stay in a pure state, so you can stay stable, so you can stay safe, and so you can grow. We miss that entire period because we're too busy fighting with God, going back and forth about it. You think about it. When we think back to every major prophet had to go through an incubation period, a period of being set aside so they can develop. You've got Moses, and he didn't even know he was in an incubation period. That's what was beautiful about that. But Moses was in that wilderness for 40 years because there's a lot that had to happen behind the scenes with Moses. Okay, so that's a lot. But then you think about David, anointed king at 12 or 13, and couldn't go be king. He had to go back and finish dealing with the sheep. He had to go back in the backyard. So imagine you're anointed as king, and you don't become king until about 30, because there's a whole incubation period that lasted years for David. He had to grow. He had to grow in wisdom. He had to grow in stature. He had to trust God. God had to move some things out of the way for him. And in order for that to happen, he had to be in a period where he was not king, where he was pulled aside. And then he got to the point where he was getting fame and he was getting notoriety, and he had to be pulled back again, which is so many of us. We get to this point where it's like, okay, fine. We think we're here. We think that we are getting the notoriety, and we're finally in the flow of things, and things are great. I'm at the top, and now you want me to pull back again. For why, though? And that's a question I think that we ask a lot. For why? Like, I'm here now. Why do I need to pull back? And with David, he had to pull back because, if you all don't know, you have to look at the story of King Saul and David. But his own mentor began to hunt him. But what I love about God is what we see as nothing but bad in the isolation period. What we see as conditions that are not favorable. We see all these conditions as not favorable. God sees every condition as favorable for our growth and our change if we allow him to maneuver these situations on our behalf. And and it's so hard, but if we stop complaining about being isolated, and if we really sit back and do the work, if we really sit back and allow God to change you and grow you. So David goes back into another isolation period. Not even isolation. My man is running in caves, living in caves, just doing whatever, right? So he can survive. But that whole period was necessary because he learned how to lead. He went from leading himself to 300 men, 600 men, to eventually an entire nation. During that incubation period, he learned how to trust God. He learned how to be resourceful. He learned all of these things that he would not have learned in a palace. He had to learn by being pulled aside. He had to learn by being set apart. Not to mention, if he had stayed where he was and he did not allow God to pull him aside and set him apart, he would have been killed. And that is so many of us. We want to be in the mix and we want to stay in the mix, but many of us are in the mix of something that's not healthy for us. It's toxic as all get out. And we're on the verge of that whole, back in the day, we used to say, check yourself before you wreck yourself. We're on the verge of that, and we don't see it, but God sees it. So God desires to pull us back so we don't end up in the pit. But to us, it's something totally different. Like, why? And we miss it. And we keep ourselves in something that's toxic that could eventually kill us. If not physically, definitely mentally, emotionally, and all that other stuff. So we missed that period. So the period of isolation, and I want to say that when you miss that incubation period, when you consistently bypass that period, when you consistently fight God about that period of being set aside and being maintained, you end up missing the fullness of who you can become. You end up missing the fullness of who you are. You end up missing the chance to become everything that you're supposed to become. I mean, I think about, you think about all these men in the Bible that we talk about. Elijah went through a period of isolation. Well, he did it to himself, child. But God still even used that. But that period of isolation allowed David to become who he was supposed to become. You even think about Jesus. I always say, if the Lord and Savior has to go through these things, why we feel like we don't have to go through them? Why we feel like, we can't go through them, we don't need to go through them, when you absolutely do. So Jesus went through that period of isolation for about 40 days. And he always knew who he was, right? You coming out with a mission, you're the Son of God, we all know who he was. But he was really able to step into the fullness of who he was during that time. And what's beautiful about isolation periods is this. You can have many of them. And each and every period of isolation that you go into, if you are doing the right thing during that time, each and every one can lead you to the point where you find the fullness of who you're supposed to be. You find the greatness of who you're supposed to be. If you, what I will say to myself, sit your behind down somewhere and learn. All right. So when I was looking up incubation, there are so many different factors to incubation that will allow something to change and grow. But one of the main factors, and I'm definitely looking at my notes, like for real, because I want to do this right. One of the main factors is the temperature. In order for the incubation period to be successful, in order for change to take place, in order for a transformation to take place, the temperature has to be right. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the temperature has to be set at the way that the manufacturer told you to set it. If you do not set the temperature of that incubation thing the way the manufacturer told you to, everything will fall apart and it won't change or grow. Okay, the temperature of your growth period has to be set by God. And if it's not set by God, if it's not set by your manufacturer, do not be surprised when things begin to fall apart. That's the whole point of it. So why is temperature important? Okay, let's get into that. Let me say hey to Miss Ashley. Let's get into why the temperature is so important. We just said that if you don't maintain it the way it's supposed to, it'll fall apart. The temperature of something is going to control the atmosphere, which controls your movements and your response. So what do I mean by that? It has been 95 to 100 degrees here in Connecticut. And because the temperature has been that high, the atmosphere has been thick. The atmosphere has been muggy. The atmosphere has not been good air quality, which means that my first thought pattern is going to be, okay, I can't go outside for too long because it's not safe for me. My asthma acting up. Y'all know I'm black, but I barely got melanin. So I have this little sun allergy going on. So I have anything to protect me. So I know that because the atmosphere isn't right, I can't go out there. So the temperature controlled the atmosphere, which then controlled my thought patterns and then controlled how I moved and how I responded. Okay. So the temperature sets the atmosphere and the atmosphere sets your response. That is why in your incubation period, what does this have to do with incubation? That is why when your period being set apart, it is really important that you set, stabilize, and maintain the right temperature / atmosphere for your spirit and for your life. Because if the atmosphere is off, so is the rest of you is going to be off. And you're going to respond to that. And your thoughts are going to respond to that. That's why, what do I do during the incubation period? First things first, prayer is always going to be the top part. Prayer is always going to be the top. But as you're praying, you set the temperature. You set the atmosphere. So what does that look like? That looks like you have to have the right people in your life. the right people in your circle, the things that you watch to have, the things that you watch has to be on point. The things that you listen to has to be on point. Whatever it is that you're taking in that has the ability to change, grow, or damage your spirit has got to be taken in, has got to be watched, and you have to make sure you're setting it right. Because these are all gateways. Your eyes, your ears, they're all gateways. And that's why it's a very think on. You walk into a room and you feel great, okay? And then all of a sudden, that room, if somebody is miserable in that room, what typically happens is you feel that misery and you find yourself slumping down a little bit. Oh, what's wrong with y'all? Why y'all acting like this? Because that atmosphere has now affected your spirit, your thoughts, and now you're responding to it. So your whole incubation period, you want to grow, you want to get better, you want to reach the next level, you got to watch the temperature and the atmosphere of that period that you're in. You've got to watch it. The next thing that you're going to do during the incubation period, this is literally what I did. I came back really strong. I came back really hard because I did not take my incubation period for granted. Okay? That's not on the list, but I do want to say that. I did not take my incubation period for granted. Also, you got to watch your response. How you respond in this whole time is everything. If every response out of you is negative, if every response out of you is, this is so hard, why me? I can't get there. If that's your response, that is all you are going to get. You have got to watch your response at all times. I hear constantly, it's not what happens to you, it really is how you respond. So during this incubation period where you're set aside for your own change and for your own growth, how are you responding? If all you're doing is complaining and mad about it, and nobody loves me, and nobody's in my corner, and nobody's there for me, then baby, it's going to be really hard for you to reach the fullness of who you can be during this time if all you're doing is complaining. Me talking to me, though. Definitely me talking to me. Don't take this period for granted. Once you get to the awareness that, being set apart is actually for your good and for your benefit, now I be like, God, when is we going to do the next sabbatical? Like, I'm ready. Like, I'm cool with this. But once you understand that this is for your growth, don't take any of it for granted. So how do you do that? You stop complaining. You increase in gratefulness. I spent, during my incubation, during my period of being isolated and set apart, I spent 21 days in a neurophysical rehab center. And I watched 18-year-old children that would never be able to walk again because they were in an accident. I watched, I watched my own brother have to fight his way back for everything. He has to fight to eat on his own. He has to fight to go to the bathroom on his own. He has to fight to shower on his own. I watched all these people and I really began to think, like, I be out here complaining about everything and I have the use of everything. I complain about everything and I have the use of everything. Like, I'm not grateful enough. And then I wonder what's taking so long? Because I complain about what other people got that I don't have? Come on now. So during that time, you increase your gratefulness. Also, the next thing you're going to do during your whole incubation period is you're going to strengthen yourself spiritually. Prayer, books. I don't have my books with me. I meant to bring them over here, but I get really nervous when I go live, y'all. I get really nervous, especially tonight. Books, the word of God, prayer. You want to have all that on deck when you're doing your incubation period. You're not supposed to just sit there and look at the four walls and watch TV. That is another thing. I eliminated all distractions. You don't need the distractions right now. So I'm in prayer a lot more. An hour a day I was in prayer. You definitely don't have to do that. Like, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. So I can hit an hour in prayer. But if you're new to this, you might want to, decrease it. Unless the Holy Spirit hits you, then baby, you run and you go with it. Okay. And I was reading books that will strengthen me spiritually. I got recertified. I was increasing my knowledge, increasing my prayer life, increasing my spiritual stamina. And I was in that word like nobody's business. But that's all the cute stuff, right? That's all the cute things that you can do during this time. The things that were not so cute that I really had to take hold of and I really had to look at, I had to reflect on my bad habits. Because the whole point is to change and transform, right? So that means that there are some things that need to be changed. That means that there are some things that have to be transformed. So I began to look at what my bad habits are. Why do I keep comparing myself to everybody? when you're not doing half bad? Why do I keep, why do I keep expecting so much? What is going like what's going on with me there? I had to really reflect on that. But also I had to stop being afraid of those unhealed parts. I find that when God calls you into a period of isolation, those unhealed parts have got to be dealt with. Because if you want to get to elevation, child, let me just tell you the unpacking that you are going to have to do. And there's so much of it. You don't want to take those unhealed parts into your elevation, because eventually, I was telling somebody earlier tonight that when you pack away those unhealed parts, you put them in a closet and you close the door, you can elevate, you can go forward, but eventually what happens is that stuff spills out anyway. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of it. So during my period of isolation, I had to look at the things that I was afraid to look at. The fact that Shamar don't trust nobody, bro. I had to say that. You know what was really difficult? Not only did I have to realize that I don't trust anybody, I had to say that there are times where I just don't trust God. And that's why I wasn't hitting the levels that I needed to hit, because I kept trying to control everything. What's the basis of control? You don't trust nobody. Shamar trusts nobody. I had to really come to terms with that and repent on that and ask God to forgive me and ask people in my life to forgive me. And I had to really think about how many people did I chase away with the fact that I don't trust anybody. So I won't let anybody help me and I won't let anybody be there for me. All of that had to change. I had to handle my unforgiveness. There was a lot of forgiving that I had to do that I just did not get a chance to do. And I needed to do that during this period of isolation and being separated. I had to tackle unforgiveness. I'm looking at my notes. So I want to make sure I'm really giving you all a clear idea of what to do when you're in this isolation period. So I had to learn to forgive a few people. I don't want to go too far there because I want to maintain other people's privacy as well. But I had to do a lot of forgiving. And I had to ask God to forgive me on a lot of things. The other part of isolation is, look, y'all, take y'all behind to therapy. Oh, this is hitting. Thank you for the transparency. I'm glad. IG is popping tonight. I don't have my Facebook popping as much, but IG is popping tonight. Take yourself to therapy. If you're going to set yourself apart and pull yourself back, go to therapy. I'm saying in my Maryland voice, go to therapy, because it makes no sense to pull back and to be in this place of, I want to change, I want to transform, and you do nothing about it. You can tap into the parts of yourself that needs to be healed, but you need somebody on the outside looking in that's going to take you through it. Go to therapy. So I increased therapy. I was in therapy like once a week on why Shamar doesn't trust anybody. What happened there? Why does she only trust herself? I thought it was a good thing. Turns out it was not a good thing. And I find that people are afraid of therapy because people are really afraid to unlock those portions of themselves that they don't want, that needs to be unlocked, that they don't want to unlock. But it's necessary. So go to therapy. The other thing that I did that I found really helpful was journaling. Because when you journal, you transfer that energy. It goes from outside, from staying inside of you and swimming around inside of you, and you're transferring that energy to something outside of you. You're writing it down. You're getting it out of your head. You're getting it out of your thoughts. You're getting it out of your mind, and you're putting it somewhere else other than inside of you. Not to mention, when you journal, a lot of times, like the transparency series, I realized I had a whole series by my journaling, because I was just writing things down. I'm like, oh shoot, I tackled that and I tackled that. So let me talk about this. So journaling is a big thing. And then you are going to, I don't want to go over 30 minutes, but we are almost there. You're going to strategize and re-strategize. I took a step back and I was like, okay, how am I moving forward? If I'm healing, if I'm growing, if I'm doing all these things in this time of isolation, how am I going to move forward? How am I going to strategize the next step? And how am I going to re-strategize what I've been doing? I can't answer that question for you. That's between you and whoever it is that you're working with. But there has to be a period of strategizing and re-strategizing. And then for me, learning to love loudly and unapologetically and not being afraid of it. All of this, all of these things, and this was just my incubation period. But these are things that are helpful for you to do, so you're not just sitting around staring. It's an active process, change, transformation, setting apart, maintaining, growing. It's all active. And it looks different for each person. So give yourself a lot of grace in the process. So the one thing I do want to touch on also, I always say that, y'all, I'd be like, the one thing I want to touch on, maybe like 25 things I want to touch on, right? Some of you are going to watch this and you're going to say, okay, well, it's too hard. I'm trying and it's not working. I keep trying to change and it doesn't work. I take 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. Listen to your language. Watch your language. Your language cannot be bipolar. Every week, when I leave the windows open, something gets up in here every single week. But anywho, your language cannot be bipolar. Because if your language is bipolar, then you're not going to move forward the way you move forward. Then yes, everything will be difficult. You keep saying how difficult it is, and it will be difficult. So watch your language during this whole period of elevation and incubation. Watch your language. Do not be bipolar with your language. Learn to use I am statements. And here's a really powerful thing about I am statements. The I makes it present. The am makes it, the I makes it personal. The am makes it present. So instead of saying, it's hard for me to change, it's hard for me to get healed, it's hard for me to get whole, it's just difficult, you have to start saying, I am healed, I am whole, I am confident, I am all of these things that I want to be. That period is to get you there. And the I am statement, it's a twofold thing, right? The I am statement works in positive and negative. That's why it's so personal. If you use I being personal, am being present for something positive, that's what you're bringing into you at that point in time. If you use it for something negative, I am never going to get this right. I am never going to be able to change. I am always going to have a hard time with this. Then you have made it personal and you have made it present. And don't ask why you are struggling. Your language cannot be bipolar during this time. You've got to speak what you need to see. And I always say the reality is what it is that you're looking for has already happened in the spiritual realm. You bringing it here, I am, makes it manifest here. And I think that's a beautiful thing to know, that everything that you're desiring to be has already happened. You just have to bring it out here. All right. Last part, because I'm trying not to go over 30 minutes, but I am going over 30 minutes. Okay, I'm trying not to go over 30 minutes. So the isolation, which we talked about, if you're just popping on, you have missed a lot. You may have to go back. The isolation leads to your incubation, which is that important period for growth and stability and change and transformation. That then leads to your elevation. Elevation is really hard to touch on because everyone's elevation looks totally different. But what I'm saying is you need to be able to get to elevation. If you want to get to elevation, you need to be able to get to the point where you can pull back a little bit and go through your incubation period. Okay. So for my elevation, and I mean, and I mentioned the prophets, you think about all the prophets, everyone had a different elevation. Elijah, the prophet, isolated his own self. Okay. He was just like, I'm no better than my fathers. After a great victory, he isolated his own self. So his elevation was, my man went straight to heaven. Like, yo, come on, let's go. You ain't about to die. We just gonna take you straight up. Boom. David's elevation was he became one of the last great earthly kings. I like to make emphasis on that because Jesus is the greatest king. David became one of Israel's last great earthly kings. What do I mean by that? I mean, somebody can go in here and say, oh, well, Solomon stabilized the country and they got wealthy, but spiritually they were bankrupt. Okay. Moses' elevation, come on now, my man wrote half of the Old Testament. Like, a man wrote the first 5 books. Like, what? So your elevation is going to be for you. Jesus' elevation, eventually he sat at the right hand of the Father. Your elevation is for you, but you have to go through this period of change and transformation, which means you have to be set apart in order to get there. For me, look at everything I've been able to teach you all. Like, everything I've been able to teach, everything I'm putting out there, the new confidence that I have, which is dope because it's not really confidence in myself, although I'm confident in myself. I'm more confident of the God in me that can do all of these works versus myself, because I'm going to get tired. Okay. I'm going to get weary. I'm going to feel like I want to quit. I'm going to feel like I want to pull back, but the Spirit of God in me never does that. So I'm more confident in the Spirit of God with me. The revelations have been real. All of these series that we're about to go into have all come from that period of isolation that I took for 30 days. Now I told you, now I'm out here like, yo, what's next, God? When we going on another sabbatical? Like, I'm ready. Let's go. Interestingly, also, what I found is during this period, God, all of your needs will be met and supplied. I have not wanted for anything. I actually gained other things during this period, but that's for another thing. All right, so I feel like I'm finally beginning to reach the fullness of who I am as a woman, as a woman, as a woman of God, as a change agent, as a future wife. All of that happened during isolation. Tore down, built up, got confidence. Your confidence, healed, whole, obedient. There's more coming. All took place after my period of transformation. Excuse me, incubation. I got a lot of coming on. And I believe that God is beginning to show himself mighty in ways that I've never seen before. And I know that there is more to come. And the personal relationship has gotten much stronger. So your elevation will be really based on you. So I wanted to touch on this tonight because a lot of us get nervous about taking the breaks that we need and pulling back and being isolated because we look at it the wrong way. Yo, I'm going to tell you what, you know what's wrong? You know what's not cute? You know what's not cute? Being burnt out. What's not cute is falling apart and watching everything else fall apart around you. I got on so much makeup. And watching everything else fall apart around you because you didn't take the time to pull back. What's not cute is staying in the mix and always being involved in something, knowing good and well that you're not in a good state mentally and you need to pull back so you can get stable again. That's what's not cute. We think being isolated isn't cute because we don't get to be at the parties, we don't get to be out, and we don't get to be doing all of this. Okay. You can do all of that and still be depressed. That's why people that commit suicide, oh my God, I never thought they would. You could do all of that and still not be in a good state mentally. Versus just take the break that you need and go for it. Okay. So that is all that I have because I got to close my windows, y'all. Every week I go through this. Every week I have these windows open with no screens, and I just be going hard in the summertime, acting like it's not summertime. All right. So next week we are not back here because I have a master class to help run. But we are going to take a little bit of a break of the transparency series. I might actually do it on a Wednesday so we can actually keep it going. So look out for that. I think we'll go for it on next Wednesday instead of Thursday. So I can run a master class. But we're back here again next week with another topic, with more things. Invite your friends, share this out, really go in. I'm like in a and that's that. And we're going to continue this series as long as you all want this series to continue. As long as I can not be by the window with the window open. Yeah, I get it. All right. So we'll be back here next week. I just wanted to share that with you. This has been a really special time for me. As hard as this time has been, it has been something that I have needed. I am now excited for when God calls for another sabbatical, because I know that he is getting me ready for something else as he is you. So instead of fighting the sabbatical, lean into it a little bit, grow through what you need to grow through, and continue on. So that is all I have for tonight. I will see you all back here next week. Share this out. Oh, updates. We're also on YouTube. So this is going to be on YouTube along with some other shorts and whatnot. And we're just going to keep growing this thing however God tells me to grow it and what God tells me to say. So I will see you all next week. Have a wonderful night.